All right, we're recording. Okay. So we're up. We got Lazarus going. That thing is. Yep. That's it. That's working. All right. So there's a lot of excitement with Lazarus, and Lazarus. Jesus is going to Lazarus, and of course, he's died, and this is where he's getting to Bethany. And so the first one we got here on his arrival, that is at Bethany, Jesus found that Lazarus already been in the tomb for 4 days. The words used actually in the Greek are really interesting. When Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave for 4 days already. Alethon, he came or went off, certainly accordingly. The Jesus, he found him 4 elements, tesarius. Even now, periods, he having held into them minim eo, the sepulchral monument. That's really different than both the NIV and the King James gives us, because the Greek itself is very concrete. So here's the translation. Accordingly, Jesus went off. Ours says arrived. He went off. In other words, he was at Bethany. He found him even now. 4 elements, periods, he having held on to into the sepulchral monument. Now, is their translation okay? Yeah, in the tomb. The Greeks, the Greeks and the Hebrews did stuff differently. The Jewish and the Greeks did their burial rites differently. You know that remember, we've talked about this before a little bit, but the Hebrews borrowed a lot of the Egyptian burial kind of things. They didn't mummify people, but they wrapped them up in stuff like a mummy, right? And then they let their bones rot in a tomb until they put them into a little, what do you call them, a casket, right? Into a smaller casket. They put the bones themselves into the casket. I don't know if they're saving space or what they did, but that was their way of taking care of the bones of the bodies of their people. They don't do anything like that today. I don't know of anybody that does that, but that's the way they did it in Jesus' time. And we know that when they put Jesus in the tomb, right, they were preparing him for a similar kind of thing. The unguents and the spices they put on him were really in honor, but not to preserve the body per se. They wanted the bodies to rot so that then the bones would be able to be placed in their little caskets. And if you've been in that area, you've probably seen the caskets. You've seen them in the Vatican. You've seen them in the museums. And then how did the Greeks do it? Well, the Greeks kind of were eclectic, but from my research and from when I was writing the second mission, the Greeks, the way they took care of Plato's body was, or Socrates' body, was very similar to what they had done. They would have a memorial stone and they would bury them very similar to our burial things. Many times they would, they had cremations, but we're not sure when they began that. But generally they would bury the body in the ground, the depths, we do the 6-foot thing and whatever, that comes from, I guess, Victorian England and the English kind of process. But the Greeks would bury them, and then they would put flowers and things over the bodies, and they would cover the bodies over, they would bury them, and then they would have a great feast. The great feast to celebrate their lives, and everybody would kind of rejoice because they had gone on, not necessarily to the Elysian fields. They didn't know, the afterlife in the Greek worldview is not a very positive thing. Everybody went to Hades. Maybe if you were special, you went to the Elysian fields. In the early era, you only earned the Elysian fields after a certain period of time later on, if you were a hero, you could go to the Elysian Fields. And then later on, after Alexander the Great and the Hellenization of the world, they brought back, what do you call it, reincarnation. And so the Greeks in the late era had this reincarnation thing. So you went to Hades, you were in the Elysian Fields maybe for a little bit, and then if you were good, you were reborn. Okay, this, go figure. When Christianity hit the Greeks, that was one of the greatest things for the Greeks, because the Greeks were like, oh, there's heaven and there's hell. And everybody who's, with Jesus can go to heaven. This seems like a positive to us. I mean, the others, everything else just seems kind of negative, but whatever. But that's the way that they took care of the bodies. In this case, you notice what they mentioned. They're using pure Greek. They talk about a memorial stone. And the memorial stone, of course, in the Hebrew, you got to translate this in the Hebrew worldview, right? Because we're going to see it described is really a tomb, very similar to what they put Jesus into. So we're seeing, do you see this culturally? We're using Greek cultural forms to describe Hebrew kind of stuff. So again, the audience, who's the audience here? But there's a lot that's built into this. This 4 elements thing is really interesting because this isn't me. This is right from the sources, of the Greek itself. And it says, thesaurus, 4, which sometimes also symbolizes universality, the total coverage and inclusion. The word means inclusion because of the view of the 4 elements of the world: fire, earth, air, and water. Okay, look, we don't do the fire, earth, war. We don't do the melancholy, the phlegms, the melancholy. What were the 4? You remember those 4 things? The melancholy.
Bile and blood.
Yeah, humors. The 4 humors, right? Okay, we don't go into that, right? Well, we kind of talk about it. We do it through literature, but we don't do it because we're still in the animist, pantheonic, pagan kind of worldview, right? Nobody knows about physical forces and physics. They haven't figured out the way this all fits together. So, you're going to find these kind of things within the cultural talk. Is it a negative? It's no negative. It's just the way they saw the world. And if you read any medieval literature, make sure you stick into that. When you hear about the melancholy Dane, they really mean the melancholies, right? He was melancholic because of his humors. These are important things within a cultural understanding of what's going on. But anyway, so that Jesus finds out he's dead. He's already been 4 days within the tomb. And they use the word universality, or the thesaurus. It's 4. Yeah, but the reason they use those words is because how many days? Is it partial days? No, it's 4 full days, complete days. This gives us the idea that, okay, Jesus was wandering out, or he wasn't neglecting Lazarus. He wasn't waiting around for Lazarus, but he obviously was taking his time, right? And now we've got the sisters, and that's where we're getting into now. So we got this, and I also have this in here, although I'm not going to go into great detail this, but this memorial stone monument, a sepulchral monument, in any case. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and you know what I got to do with that? Now, Bethany was lying to Jerusalem about 15 furlongs, but the Bethany near to Jerusalem, which how and what manner away from Stadion, 10 and 5. It's Stadion. It's not furlongs. It's not miles. It's stadia. It's the measure of the Greeks. Anyway, I've got it for you here. But Bethany was near Jerusalem, 10 and 5. 15 stadia, which how away from it. And again, remember, I think it's important to note their base 5 culture, 10 and 5. 2 5s and 5. I just think that's kind of funny. But you notice what they got here. So I calculate out for you. If you're using the short stadia, it's going to be about 40 meters. If you're using the long ones for the later era, it's about 3,000. Therefore, 1.46 miles or 1.95 miles, or about this many furlongs. A furlong is about 1/8 of a mile. And of course, what's that?
Have any relation to stadium?
Yes, stadia. The reason we named the stadium, and I've been reading. Okay, we visited Olympus, and I got my books, and the stadia was the first race they did, and the stadia is approximately 600 feet. That's how long their foot race was. So a stadium is what? About 600 Greek feet long. So that's how they measured their race. And by the way, our 600 meters is about a stadium. That's about the same distance that they run. So kind of cool, right? All this stuff, how it fits together. We still use the same thing. And by the way, if you go to Olympia, you'll see the stadia and the stadium, and you'll see the measure, because it's the measure that they use for the race. And yes, it is. And many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. Ooh, this is a very interesting statement. Many of the Jews came to Mary and Martha to comfort them concerning their brother. That's not what it says at all. Polai many much often, but from out or among of the Judans, the Judeans, they had come or gone forward to Mary, Martha and Miriam, in order that, and here's the word, paramythsontai. Paramythsontai. They might, here is what a translation is. I'm going to go into detail about this word because it's a very important word. They might near tell everything that cannot exist in reality. Paramythsontai. Them through all over of the Adelpho, the male sibling of the same womb. This word, this is a very important word. Here's the translation. But many out from among the Judeans had come forward to Martha and Mary in order they might near tell them mythic reasoning through all over the male sibling of the same womb. Now here's the translation. We translated it in many of the Jews came to Mary to comfort them. All right. You could almost say this is sweet nothings, but this is a very, very important word because this word is not used at all in the New Testament. The word comes from mythos. And I'll just give you, here's a little paper on this, very short, but here's the word, paramythomai, derived from para, right, para close, near, and mythomai, soothing speaking. That's not exactly what the word means because we got our word logos, right? We got the word legai, logical argument. This is a word we hear all the time to make a logical argument. There is another word in Greek that is not found in the New Testament. There's mythai. Mythai is the opposite of legeia, of legos, of legai. The opposite. And the reason I wanted to, like I said, there are a couple of incidences when this word is used in the New Testament that not mythai, but the para mythai. And it's usually translated as comforting words, right? In other words, sweet nothings, lies, whatever. But the reason this myth word is very important is because I want you to see the comparison between the two. This is probably a one-off. If I ever have another chance to talk about this word, it's really an important word because it is used, like I said, this is one of the words. You know how we got these words? We got Femi and Remi. We got logos. We got Femi, Remi, epe. We have like about 8 words this is one of those words. Mathai is a word that the Greeks used routinely for say or said. But like I said, not found in the New Testament, except for in this form, paramatheia. We'll see why, but here's the notes on this. Okay, throughout the ages, you understand the term myth evolved, taking various forms, both ancient and Christian culture. The original and basic meaning of this term, myth, is expressed in Homer's works. The everything human speech, true or false, is mythos. In other words, the original word that the Greeks used for saying about things generally was mythos. Originally. Its meaning is very close to Lego. You notice they translate speak, but we know it's not to speak. Legos means to state a logical argument, a refined thought that you've thought through. In the same way as a noun, mythos is similar to logos. The term logos and legein were used by Herodotus when he presented narratives about gods and heroes, also those he did not believe in. Since the times of Xenophanes of Colophon, who was the first one to criticize and reject mythical images about divinity proposed by Homer and Hesiod in the 7th century, Greeks gradually purified mythos from any religious and metaphysical meaning. In the times of Plato, in the 4th century before the Christian era, there appeared a distinction between mythos and logos, which juxtapose fiction, mythos, and truth derived from reason, logos. A verb, mythologian, appeared at the time and denoted relaying myths or narrative poetic tales. Thus, the term myth, in contrary to logos in history, was meant to denote anything that cannot exist in reality. On the other hand, mysterious sentence should be remembered that Judeo-Christian also rejected as a lying illusion everything that was not confirmed and authenticated by the Old or New Testament. Well, it's more than that. Such as the perception of a myth as fiction is still widespread in colloquial language instead of another perception of myth as a living reality. The reality which attempts to find an answer to fundamental existential issues, et cetera, whatever. It's worth realizing that the knowledge, and this is all Greek, or not, this is British, right? So they spelling things a little different than us. Function of myths of traditional societies, et cetera. The big deal here is that myth was the way of speaking about tales. The Homeric tales, you know, the Greeks noted and used mythos. Logos was for this reasoned, physical, logical, to a degree empirical, right? Not really empirical, because we're talking about logic and reasoning. But do you notice, this is why it's not found in the New Testament, right? Because, what's that?
The word mythos, you mean?
Yeah, mythos is not found in,
Because
what's that?
I was just thinking back to, I had just been studying Second Timothy, and I went to the Greek next to the English in Bible Hub, and it says mythos, because when Timothy talks about
Paramythos.
Paul talks about people wander away into myths because they won't endure sound teaching.
Yeah.
Has the word mythos there?
No, actually, the word, according to, in the Greek, here it is. The word mythomai is a keyword to Greek form of speaking, as the article denotes. Mythomai is about a world that doesn't exist compared to logos, et cetera, et cetera. The word mythomai is not found in the New Testament. Now, about mythos, paramythomai is found in 4 places. John 11:31, 1 Thessalonians 2:12, and 5:14. And the lack of the word, use of the word. Now, mythos, you said you found mythos where?
In 2 Timothy 4:4, but I was looking for mythos, not mythomai.
Mythos, the Greek word mythos?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't look up the Greek word mythos itself. The point I want to make here, though, the really important point is, this is one of those words, okay? we don't see it. We see rimi and fimi and all those really cool words, but we don't see mythomai, because the New Testament authors were not writing about mythomai. They're writing about logos. And I think this is really important. In defending, for example, the New Testament writings, the Gospels and other things, this, I think, is a very important point, because the authors themselves, what are they saying by saying we're writing logos? It's truth. It's what we know, right? Yeah, we're not writing the Homeric, we're not writing Homeric dialogues. We're not writing the Homeric odes. We're not writing, the Odyssey and the Iliad, which they knew, right, was myth. See, we're writing real and historical. I think this is really interesting because, or I think it's really important both to us and historically, because do you see the Greeks themselves recognize that their pantheon was myth? They recognized it was a myth. But what do they recognize about the New Testament and about the historical writings that we're talking about? They stated over and over again it was a logos. Likewise, when you read, we're not going to bring out the Socratic dialogues and Plato and all, but when you look at them, what they talk about logos, when they're talking about real things, right? They denote the difference between mythos and logos. And I think this, the word structure, it's really funny that they this word, which is a really, really, really important word, mythodeomai, they translate it as comforting words. Like I said, sweet nothings. Okay, so maybe they were sweet nothings. The characterization is that the Judeans that were talking to Mary and Martha were just saying nice things about Lazarus, right? Which may or may not have been true, but they were talking nice. Okay, that's cool. But it's really interesting within the context that we have this very, very complex word, culturally, right? And we turn it into comforting them. That's what's so funny to me. Because as a Greek reader or hearer, you'd go, whoa, right? But as an English hearer, you go, oh, okay, whatever. They're saying nice things. I just think it's kind of funny we see that. And I have to look at the myth. So you said it was in Timothy, mythos, right?
2 Timothy 4:4.
In any case.
But it makes sense in that context. But again, it wasn't, I was looking for the wrong word, not the one you were talking about.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
But it makes sense there because he's talking about when the time will come when people will not endure sound teaching, which is reality, but they'll wander away into myths because they're, don't want to, they will listen to whoever suits their passions.
Yeah, yeah.
Like today.
Like
Yes,
today.
yes,
Yeah, like
yes.
today. And I see, like I said, the word, using this word is not a negative connotation in the text. It just means they were speaking sweet and not quite completely truthful or rational words about Lazarus to his sisters. They're trying to assure them about his legacy and importance. And that brings up a really important point. Who was this Lazarus guy, right? And what I did is I went back, and here's Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus. Okay. Now, we're going to discuss this so that, but in the other Gospels, we have a Lazarus. And I just want to bring up this Lazarus. There's a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, lived in luxury every day. The gate was laid, a beggar named Lazarus. It's a beggar. Covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dog came and licked his sores. Time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, where he's in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus by his side. He called him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in the water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony. Abraham replied, Son, remember in your lifetime you received good things while Lazarus received bad. Now he's comforted here, and you're in agony. We said all this between us and you is a great chasm set in place so that those who want to go from or to can't, etc. And he answered, I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so they will not also come to this place of torment. And Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. No, Father, Abraham said, if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. If someone from the dead comes to them. And he said to them, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Whoa. Whoa, very interesting. You know, you wonder, why did Jesus turn this into a parable? A parabola, right? About, you know, is this a parable? What is this? Lazarus is pictured as the poor guy, not a rich guy, but yet we're going to see more about this.
On a timetable, when did this come in relation to, you know, obviously, before he raised Lazarus?
I'm not sure of the timetable when the parable was. I'm a guessing that the parable, if we look back, we probably find that the parable may have happened after Lazarus' resurrection because of the way it's put together. But it's a really interesting parable because if it relates to the, you know, all right, let's go back. Historical stuff, right? History. What do we record? What do we not record in history?
Stuff that everybody knows.
Yeah, stuff that everybody knows and stuff that's like, so, you know, generally, why would Lazarus, the resurrection of Lazarus not be found in the other three Gospels?
Because they already knew it, or it wasn't necessarily important to them to prove their points?
I would say because everybody knew. Because if a guy is resurrected from the dead, I mean, that's like ginormous, right? Especially,
Front page news.
yeah. So everybody knew, so you don't need to write it down if everybody knows about it, right? However, this really cool little parable is, you know, relating back to it because what is it saying? It's saying they didn't believe even though they saw. So it's a parable that relates directly back to an event that really happened. Now you get a later date gospel where I told you, the Greeks and Romans are going, tell us more, right? And so what did John write down? He wrote more, and he wrote down the stuff that happened, and this is a generation about after, right, that period. So it's in date, and people are forgetting maybe, or, you know, it's not front page anymore. So he put it in. And also, there's the other problem. Remember that historically, I told you before, what do people not do generally in antiquity? They don't mention themselves, and they don't mention many times those others within the context of their time. People, names, dates, stuff like that. I mean, we get names and dates in the Gospels, which is really cool. And you do get that in a lot of the historical documents, but people tend to be refrained. In other words, we're not into the area yet where it's fun to insult people, you know, historically or otherwise. You know, defamation, they can't sue them yet, but you know, still you see people not generally defaming, right? Not generally, and mentioning Lazarus at that time might have been considered what? Not a positive thing, especially for Lazarus when in the context of Christ's death and resurrection and the persecutions and other things that are happening. So, you know, keep it on the down low. Now, Lazarus is probably dead by the time John wrote his gospel. No harm, no foul, right? Mary and Martha might have been dead by that time. So, you know, who cares, right? Because you're giving historical accounts about people who are gone, and so you can get away with it. Plus, you can mention their names, you can name drop and not cause any problems for them within the society. So, I don't know, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. So who is Lazarus? Who is Lazarus? He's not likely a Sadducee. They were very strongly Hellenized. But Lazarus had two sisters at home who were not sequestered in the Gynoseum. Do you notice that? Now, you should ask the question, why? There's a very strong possibility that their husbands had died, or possibly divorced them. That's less likely. and they had returned home. So the only reason you'd have women not sequestered in a Hellenized society, women that are not sequestered in gynoecium are women that are either previously married, or whatever, not considered to be, and they're living with Lazarus. So that means they're under his protection and under his care in that sense. So they're not isolated from men. He's likely not a Sadducee, very highly likely a Pharisee. And the reason is because he supported the resurrection of the dead. We're going to see this in a second, because Martha is going to make an incorrect statement that Jesus corrects. We get there. But in any case, so they supported the resurrection of the dead. We'll find that. The sisters were familiar with these ideas. Could he have been a zealot or an Essene? Popular. Look, if you're a zealot, are you going to be popular with the people?
No.
If you're an Essene, are you going to be popular with the people?
You're probably going to be away, right? If you're an S, you're not going to be around people.
You're not going to be around people. By the way, I always got to remind you, Josephus was an Essene. Josephus was an Essene. What could Josephus not do in Jerusalem? Go to the bathroom. The Essenes did not go to the bathroom in Jerusalem. You could not be within sight of Jerusalem. There's a special place that they went to, not inside of Jerusalem, and they held it all day, I guess. I don't know.
Is this important?
I think it's important because you gotta, okay, this is stuff that everybody knew, right? Look, the strange proclivities of groups are very important because you're not, if you see an Essene wandering around the city, he's probably walking funny. I'm just saying. Anyway, but they are in Bethany, and Bethany is out outside of Jerusalem, so it's a possibility, but I doubt it. So anyway, it is probably that he was a Pharisee because, look, he was popular with the Judeans. The Judeans had come. The reason they mention it was so close to Jerusalem is because you got all these people from Jerusalem coming to see him after he's dead. And it's 4 days later, right? They're still hanging, which is pretty interesting. Most likely, I am going to say he was probably the rabbi of Bethany. That's the reason he had such strong connections in lots of ways. I would say I'm guessing that he was a Pharisee and a rabbi. We're going to see more of that because look at the education and training that Mary and Martha had, and also their, they were free. They weren't, like I said, sequestered. This also provides connection with the rabbi of Capernaum, that I believe is Jesus. I think it's Jesus. It should be obvious that a Pharisee in Judea, loved by the Judeans, he had to be rich. Very, very rich. And otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep his sisters at home. He wouldn't be able to have a wealthy man's funeral. He wouldn't be able to feed so many after even 4 days. Plus, this is the continuation of the man born blind logos, which also includes the Pharisees of Jesus portion. Look, I know we ignore it because they separate it to another chapter, but the fact that all of a sudden the chapter changes, even though it's the same logos, right? And what's the chapter? The Pharisees of Jesus. And then what does it lead directly into? The death of Lazarus. Okay, this is not, you can't look at the New Testament as separate pieces. They're all singular logos that move through the text. And so it's all connected. So I would argue that the reason this is where it is, well, not only in a timeline, but remember that the Greeks really don't care about chronological timelines in this sense. But the reason it is where it is because we're still talking about the Pharisees of Jesus. And that means that Lazarus is most like a Pharisee, a great friend. We know he is. It says he's a shield brother, right? Love like a shield warrior. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. All right, very simple text. It's not what exactly it says, but it's okay. Martha, as soon as she heard Jesus was coming, went out and met him. Mary was still at home. Certainly or accordingly, Martha, which, how, in what manner, she heard that because Jesus is coming or going, she went opposite under. She went opposite under. Hypertension. She went opposite under. She met face to face. She fell in with Jesus. That's a very interesting statement. It's not like she went out to meet him. It's like she, he's coming and she's a going and she met in with him, right? So now she's walking with him. That's the thing. But Mary, into the dwelling, was sitting down. In the dwelling. Accordingly, Mary, which had heard Jesus was coming, she went opposite under, met him face to face. But Mary, into the dwelling, was sitting down. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. There's some interesting stuff in here. Then Mary said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Epic. Here's our she said. She said, certainly according to Martha, forward to Jesus. Supreme authority. If you had been in the same spot, no or not, it's a supposition, he has died off. The male sibling of my male sibling, my brother. Accordingly, Martha said forward to Jesus, supreme in authority, if you had been in the same spot, my male sibling in the same womb would not have died off. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. This is really interesting stuff, right? Obviously, Jesus, we want the rest, right? How many times had Jesus been to Martha and Mary's and Lazarus? This first we've heard of it, but it's obvious.
Probably a lot.
Well, when Mary and Martha was saying, Lord, tell Mary to help me make the food.
Yeah, which one is that? That's not in John, though, is it?
No, but let's see which one
Is that we later get it, though. We'll get more. But obviously, they're buds, right? They're best buds.
Wouldn't this have been where Jesus stayed whenever he visited Jerusalem?
Maybe well, see, we don't know, but he's going kind of between Jerusalem and Jericho. We want to know, when did you make buds? When did you become friends? What were you talking about, right? I mean, okay, those 4 disciples, they never got it. But did Lazarus get it? I think Martha and Mary kind of got it. What do you see? This is really interesting what happens here.
It's in Luke 10.
In Luke, yeah. But I know that even now, see, the hearers knew this.
Right, then, if this is the latest gospel, then they would have already known the Luke.
Right, and they know, right? And they're already pre-prepped. I mean, that's why, in some degree, that's why John just suddenly throws it on us, right? The resurrection of Lazarus. We want to know more. Well, we know about Mary and Martha and Lazarus, but what else, right? I think this is just, it's astounding. The Gospels are not synoptic, but they're all historical, and they all give us picture windows into the life and times of Christ, his words, his actions, his disciples, his friends, right? We don't, look, how many of you think of Jesus having friends? We don't think about Jesus having friends.
Well, he was 33 years old, and he lived quite a few years, and he was rabbi of Capernaum. So he had to have made contacts and met a lot of people.
I agree with you. I think that's true, but I never think about Jesus having friends. He had disciples, he had followers, he had people listening to him. He had enemies. Did he have friends? Well, yeah, he obviously had friends. He had Phileos. He had a shield brother. He called him his shield. And by the way, did he call the disciples shield brothers? Not yet. Not yet. He will, but not yet. I think it's a really key thing. To a degree, the disciples are shut out. No, Lazarus is part of the in-group here, right? The big guy. Anyway, it's pretty funny. Let's see. Other things, contrary-wise, and at present, I stare at, that are because, a supposition. It's really interesting, the Greek supposition, I'll re-mention this. In Greek, a word. There is a word that indicates a supposition or a wish. In English, we used to have this. It's called a subjunctive to. We don't even use it. If I were king, you ever heard that? As opposed to if I was king. If I was king indicates that I could be. If I were king indicates I never could be. It's a wish supposition. In English, we actually have a verb tense. In Greek, there's no verb tense. They tack on a really cool word, on. It indicates a supposition. And we see it quite a lot. I always leave it in, but it's just interesting. The wish supposition, you request the God, he will give to you the God. And contrariwise, at present now I stare at, because as how you might wish, request the God will give to you. And this is what Jesus says. Jesus said, your brother will rise again. Now, of course, we know we need to look at that word, right? Your brother will rise again. Legai, he making a logical argument to her, Jesus. Anna stisatei, he will stand up. Now, this is not our usual word for egirios, or Anna, whatever, the stand up in the marketplace, or egirios, to stand up. Those are the two words used, eknekros. And he doesn't say eknekros. He says that he will stand up, the male sibling of the same womb of you. Jesus making a logical argument to her, your male sibling of the same womb will stand up. And this is a word, it means to arise, to jump up, to stand up. It's not the same as egirio, or the other one, what's the other one? To stand, whatever, the one that stand up in the marketplace. That are used generally for resurrection. Remember, there is no word in the world for resurrection until Latin. And then we get it because of Christ. No one would imagine people could rise from the dead until Christ. And here's Mary answering. This is what she says. Mary answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day. And, the way they translate it, it's like, oh, that's just cool, right? Mary saith, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection of the last day. She makes a logical argument to him, Martha. I stare at that, or because anastetai, he will stand up, same word, to the anasteia, to the standing up, into the furthest hemera. Martha makes a logical argument to him. I stare at that he will stand up, into the standing up, into the farthest final period. This indicates big time that she is under Pharisee teaching. Here's the other words. Here are the words from John, specifically in 6:39. But it's a determination, active will, of the he having sent me, in order that everything which he has given to me, I should not destroy fully from out of it everything contrariwise. I will stand it, everything up into the furthest final day. This is Jesus speaking. Citing reason, it is the determination and act of will of my Father, in order that everyone being a spectator of the offspring, and he being convinced of a logical argument into him, he should hold life perpetual. And I will stand him up into the furthest final period. These kind of confirm what Mary said. Not even one is powerful enough to come forward to me, in case that if the Father, the having sent me, doesn't drag him to me, and I will stand him up into the furthest final period. He partaking of a meal of my flesh and imbibing my blood holds life perpetual, and I will stand him up into the furthest final period. 7. But into the furthest final period of the great festival, Jesus stood, and he screamed like a raving, making a logical argument, in case that a certain one thirst for, let him come forward to me and imbibe. These are Jesus' words, but I want you to see something very important here. Mary's logical argument is incomplete. And this really tells us who Lazarus and his sisters are, that they're Pharisees. Why? What did the Pharisees believe? What kind of resurrection? A physical resurrection in the last day. In other words, now the Sadducees believed in no resurrection. You're dead, you're dead. That's it. You go back to the earth, you're dust, the nefesh goes away. But the Pharisees, the big difference was they believed in a physical resurrection of the body in the final day. But what is Jesus teaching through his whole thing? Although his words sound really similar, what did Jesus tell Nicodemus? What did Jesus, and by the way, just before this section, Jesus talked about the suke, right? I will lay down my suke. But what did he tell Nicodemus? You must be born again. You're pneuma. You're pneuma. So Jesus has been teaching not just a physical resurrection, but a resurrection of the soul, the mind and soul, right? Where the Pharisees believe that, those bones, those dry bones, are going to become body again and wander around. So I think this tells us immediately that Martha is a really good Pharisee and she knows her stuff, right? She's right on and she's been listening to Jesus, but guess what? She didn't get it exactly right. Not exactly right.
There's another point too. I don't think a woman that wouldn't have felt comfortable having this direct conversation with a man that's not of her family. So they had to have a close relationship for her.
Really close. Well, okay.
As far as, friendship, or he's around them enough that she could do this. She could talk to him this way.
I'm not giving any negatives at all into Martha. Matter of fact, what I think Martha is amazing. Martha is showing Martha characteristics from the beginning. I mean, number one, she's fixing the meal in Luke, right? In this case, what did she do? Did she wait at the house like, she was supposed to? She went running out down the road, right, to come in with Jesus. Like, coolio, right? She'd be a female shield warrior if there was such a thing in Greek thought. Again, I think we have another, the heroes. I love the Samaritan woman. I think she's a great hero. She's the smartest person in all the Gospels, all four of them, and maybe even the New Testament to a degree, right? And then you get the man born blind who's running ragged, the Pharisees, and making fun of them. And they finally just end up cussing at him. That's about it. That's all they could do. Now we get Martha. And Martha makes a very wise, probably one of the wisest statements in the New Testament. It's astounding to me that we play with Simon Peter, who says, you are the Son of God. And the next thing Jesus says is, get thee behind me, Satan, because he says something stupid. You get Martha, who says something that's not exactly perfect, but it's close. And look what Jesus says to her, because this is a really cool thing. Jesus corrects her. Let's see, did I finish in this? I said, it's not the Pharisee view of her brother and the Pharisee rabbinic family that all will be physically brought back to life in the last day. It's Jesus Christ, the God, who will stand everything up now, just as in the last day. And so Jesus corrects her, and this is what Jesus says. This is a stated telos. When the Greeks heard this, their ears burned, their eyes flashed, their eyes got big, and all the Romans were like, yay! He's giving us a telos. This may be the telos of John. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And of course, in the King James, it says something so much. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Look what it says in the Greek. He said, Epin, he said to her, to Jesus, I am, ego imi, the anastasis, a standing up and a life, and the life. He being convinced of a logical argument into or to me, in that case, that he should die off, he will live. And here's the word, zestei, he will live. Jesus said to her, I am the standing up and the life. he being convinced of a logical argument into me, in that case, if he should die off, he will live. This is literally a stated telos, and probably the telos of John. We're not going to quit. We're going to stop. We're going to keep going. But like I said, this is a very important, a very, very important statement. It's amazing that it comes right out of Jesus' mouth. And you see how it's not, he's not smacking her. He's not doing the disciple, you stupid disciple thing, right? He's gently directing her, and he's making this statement. Ego eimi. What does that mean in Greek?
I am God.
I am absolutely what I am telling you. I am I'm the standing up. I am the life. Before he told us he was the bread, right? He told us he was the suke. He told us he was the shepherd. He told us he was the gate. You know, you don't find these in the other gospels. You find these in John, because I think it's not like the chosen. John's not taking the notes, okay? They're taking notes in their brain. They're remembering these things. But these are astounding statements. Why do you think the other disciples might not have written down these statements? These are countercultural statements. In Hebrew, if you say ego eimi, you're saying, I'm God, right? If you're a Greek person saying these statements, this is an embarrassing thing, right? You don't usually say ego eimi. It is a rare thing to say in Greek ideas and thought. It's a rare thing in most cultures to say that. As a matter of fact, in most cultures, we don't do it much. The third person, the royal we have the royal we, right? A lot of cultures use the royal we when you start talking about yourself, which is kind of interesting. And in some cultures, children use the royal we to express about themselves because they are taught from the beginning. You don't say I am or I or whatever. You use what do you call it? Euphemistic. English is a strangely euphemistic language, but yet we don't use euphemism for some of the most declaratory things that people should be embarrassed about, right? Kind of funny because we have a different kind of culture. Do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, it is. So Martha's interpretation was that the resurrection the physical resurrection at the end of time.
Yes.
And Jesus says, I am the resurrection. Well, he was a physical resurrection. It wasn't a spiritual resurrection because he proves it. Put your hand in my side and see wounds in my hand.
Yes.
So it was a physical resurrection. I just find that interesting when he says, I am the resurrection. I'm the physical resurrection you're looking for.
You know, and I don't disagree with you. My point is this: I think that part of John, the writer, right, and part of our thing is this Greek worldview. You have the Hebrew worldview. The Hebrew worldview is Nefesh Adam. So Nefesh Adam says when you get resurrected, it's Nefesh Adam. It's the dirt and the breath. And you go, well, see, what really concerned the Greeks was what? So, yeah, suke, thought and free will. And, you know, Jesus' message to them is, I think, he's expanding the universe, right? Although, and I'll go back to this, it's really interesting. The Greeks worshiped Gaia and Kronos. But were Gaia and Kronos created? No, they're pre-existent, the earth. And Gaia, by the way, comes from gay, our G-E word in Greek. So gay, the worship of Gaia and gay are the same. The Greeks believed in the pre-existence of the earth and the universe and whatever. And yet in the Judaic, Jewish text, the Torah, we get in the beginning gods, our three-part God, right? And God's created, and the way they did it was through the Amar, through Christ, the logic, the reasoning, right? And what I think Jesus' whole point of John, let's say John's whole point, is to integrate this Christian ideas and Jesus ideas, which I think are uniquely Greek, into the Hebraic thought structure and into these structures. I don't mean to be too esoteric here. I'm just saying I think Jesus is telling us something about the world that we needed to hear. Remember with Nicodemus, it was all about pneuma. Just the chapter before, it was all about suke, right? I'm going to lay down my suke. The Greeks would ultimately get that. The Hebrews would start scratching their heads. See? Martha says, yes, we know about the resurrection. It's to be a physical resurrection, right? My brother will be physically resurrected. I have faith in that. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection. I am the standing up. I am the life, right? Which immediately means what you said, yeah, physically. And okay, how does he prove he is?
Eats fish.
Well, I mean, within this context, what's going to happen? He's going to resurrect. We haven't got there. He's going to He's going to resurrect Lazarus. Yes, sir.
Just another point. This previous I am statement, I think, was I am the gate.
Yeah.
So now he's saying, and I am the resurrection in the same way that I am the gate. Resurrection is not going to happen without me being a part of it. It's my resurrection. I am that, which causes the resurrection.
Beautiful connection. Yeah, you have something.
Look, she asked him, God will, if you ask God to do this, he'll do it. But he's coming back and saying, I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it. Which again, okay.
Which is the I am thing again.
Yeah, and John, John continually, I keep telling you, Jesus is giving this logos, I am God, right? Over and over and over again. He pounds us over the head with it. I don't think he's pounding us over the head with it as much as he is proving it with each point, right? It's almost like, what do you call it?
Proof text.
Well, a proof text, but constant. I was thinking about this last night about, how each of the Simeon keep getting bolder and bolder and bolder and bolder. It's almost like, if you look at it, Jesus' claims aren't changing. They're just expanding.
Crescendoing.
Yeah, crescendoing, building and building and building. And we're getting to this. This is not the peak of the gospel. This is someplace near the center of the gospel, right? But yet we would almost say this is the most astounding piece, but it's not. Jesus has said, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. Well, how do you prove you're God? Raising somebody from the dead, which has never, ever been done. The Old Testament has got a couple of cases where, there are claims, but I think they're a little bit more, less recognizable within this context, within the context of a dead person who's been dead for 4 days and all of a sudden, bam, they're alive, right? So the text itself is beautiful in the
This is
Greek.
radical.
Yeah.
Because here Jesus is doing this within 2 miles of Jerusalem. It's impossible to ignore. And there's all these witnesses, all these Pharisaic witnesses. It's impossible to ignore.
It's impossible to ignore. Yes.
Why they also plot to kill Lazarus then, not just Jesus, they plot to kill Lazarus as well.
And we don't find out about the end of that story. Darn it. Wow. It's too bad, right? And whoever lives by believing me will never die. Do you believe this? He asked her, do you believe it? And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? And all the whole, the living, and he being convinced of a logical argument into me, no or not, and look, this is that ume, no not. He should die off into the age. You are persuaded to it. And let's see, it doesn't use a question word, but it's a statement. This is not a question. He's not asking her a question. And all the living and he being convinced of a logical argument into me should know not die off into the age. The age he's talking about is the Messianic age, right? It's not just any age. And he says, you are persuaded to it. It's not a question. It's not using T. It's not using the Greek question. It is a specific statement. He is saying to her that you are convinced of it. So she gets it. He gets it. I think this is a really beautiful thing. And look what she says. Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. Well, let's see what the Greek says, right? This is just beautiful stuff. She said to him, yeah, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. She makes a logical argument to him. Nigh. We have not seen this word. I think you'll find it a couple of times in the other Gospels, but this is a rare word. Nigh means yes, but no kidding. Yes, 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 yes. It's like ume. No, not, right? In Greek. It's an absolute yes. Yes, supreme authority. I have been persuaded that because you are a Christ, the Christ, anointed one, the offspring of the Theo of a God, of the God, into the cosmos, that which was created, is coming or going. So here's the translation. That's all we got for today. She makes a logical argument to him. Yes, strong affirmation, supreme authority. I have been persuaded because you are the Christ, the offspring of the God, into thee that which was created is coming. Thank you for your word. I pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray. Amen. What a beautiful high note. And it found it.
Where's your brother?
Well done.
They're coming. Say, take off. Say.